we've got a lot of very prompt people, and I don't want to keep you all waiting too much longer. So thank you all for being here this morning for this morning's Connect Resound webinar on safeguarding for online music tuition. It's great to see so many familiar faces here in the room, and I think I can say I have discussed safeguarding and planning safeguarding and incorporating safeguarding into your online music programs with almost everybody who's in here so far. So that and the numbers of people we've had registering for today's webinar really shows what an important issue it is for everyone, and an issue on which you all felt you would value a bit more support from Connect Resound. As I said in the chat box, and as most of you know already, my name's Emily Penn, and I'm the project manager for Connect Resound, which supports music hubs and other education organisations to develop an online approach to music tuition. And we've been doing this for about 5 years now. I'm really delighted to welcome my colleague Grace from NIMAS, who is the organisation which hosts Connect Resound, and Cliff Manning, who is the Head of Digital at Parent Zone and also Associate at Carnegie UK Trust, and is somebody that we've been really privileged to have the benefit of his expert knowledge on all things digital participation and young people on this subject. So the point of today isn't to deliver an in-depth training session on safeguarding, but it is to provide a forum to discuss some of the key issues that we all need to think about in terms of safeguarding when delivering online music tuition. And we're really delighted that Cliff has been able to work with us on developing up some guidance around this. And I know that some of you have had sight of that guidance already and might have some comments and feedback and questions on it. Some of you won't have had the chance to have a look at it. And Cliff is going to just walk us through the sort of key issues that we think it's useful for hubs and music educators to talk about when thinking about safeguarding and online tuition. So we're going to have a section with a few slides, and we're then going to have open up the discussion so that we can all talk about any sort of questions, feedback that you might have, and make sure that we create this guidance in a way that's as useful for you guys as possible. So without further ado, I will actually, with a little bit of further ado, I'll hand over to Cliff. I'll just do 2 bits of housekeeping. Again, if you've got any questions as Cliff is going along with his slides, please put them in the text box, and I'll feed them back to Cliff in the Q&A session at the end. After that, we'll then switch your cameras and mics on, and we can try, we are going to have quite a few people in the room, but we'll try and have a sort of bit more of a roundtable discussion with all of us about the issue. So over to you, Cliff. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining this morning. As Emily said, if there's any technical issues, just add something into the chat box, and we can address those as we go. Also, if you feel that I'm going too fast or something, you miss something, just drop it in there, and hopefully I can recover some of the other aspects from there. As Emily was saying, this is less a sort of formal training session and more a start of a discussion with you who are already experts in delivering music tuition, and just to consider a lot of how safeguarding might differentiate when delivering live video sessions from there. So I'm just going to talk through a few slides about how I've approached this problem, how I've kind of structured my thinking, and hopefully that might be useful for everybody else. And I really welcome everybody else's input as we go. As technology and different aspects are changing, obviously this is an evolving area, so everybody's input would be really welcome. And there's no easy, direct, quick answers, I guess. It's a matter of finding the best fit for you, and that will be different for every different setting. So rather than being very prescriptive about do this, don't do that, I've taken the approach of points to consider, and maybe more questions than answers, but hopefully that's useful as a prompt to consider the approach that you're taking. So I'll just try and share my screen so you can see some of the things. Bear with me. So hopefully everybody can now see the screen okay, and I'll just go through some of these the slides from there. So when I was considering this problem, I wanted to kind of break it down into different sections. So today we're just going to talk through a sort of an introduction to the guide, who it's for, the scope of it, and how it can be used, and particularly what it's not intended to do. So just to make sure that we're sort of it's landing in the right place and is providing the right kind of connection from there. Sorry, just 1 second. No, excuse me. Okay, hopefully that's okay. So then the first part is where live video sits within a wider context of safeguarding. So it's not something that sits independently and needs to really link in with the rest of the safeguarding work that is happening in schools and with music hubs, etc. A part of that is then obviously staff responsibilities and the skills that people need to have, and where that works, how that links into the work you've already got and how you can manage staff and link it from there. And then we'll consider the practical, the technical aspects about choosing a platform, what might be appropriate, and how to make some of those choices as we go. We're not going to delve too deeply into the technical because there's so many variations, and that will really depend on the different settings and the different approaches that everybody takes, and different legacy systems, etc. But there's some principles I think which are handy when considering the whole approach to the work that you do. The other part then, which links from the platforms, is obviously things to consider when actually delivering a live video session. Just some practical considerations to think about, which don't differ massively from traditional music lessons, but there may be a few factors just to consider extra. And then be interested to consider about home access. This isn't something we've covered in depth at the moment in the draft, but I'd really welcome input from everybody else about how this might be approached, because obviously there's a different set of safeguarding concerns around that. So how we approach that and where the need might be for that, and then to just open it up to questions and next steps. So unless Emily stops me, I will carry straight on from here. So just bear with me. So when we're considering the guide, the first step was to kind of look at what the definition of the music tuition, so a music lesson in which students and teachers interact in a live teaching environment online. That's the sort of the definition that Connect Free Sound is using. I think it fits really well, but for ease of understanding, I refer to this as live video. And so we're talking about live video as just a catch-all for these kind of, let's say, the synchronous online music instrumental tuition. The aims of the guide is to help you consider and manage all the different aspects of online safety when developing live video tuition, and to consider how they fit into your general practice. So the audience really is yourselves, and at different stages. So when you're planning, managing, and actually in the use, hopefully this is a kind of live document that you can refer back to as you go. So it might be useful in the initial stages, but also hopefully useful when you're actually delivering sessions, just to consider different points, and then something which should be reviewed often as well, so that you can make sure that the systems, processes and platforms that you've got are suitable for purpose. A very important point is the scope and intention of the document and the guide. This is not intended in any way to replace any existing safeguarding policies or systems, or to it's meant to provide some guidance about how your existing safeguarding policies might apply into an online environment, and some considerations that are quite specific to digital, but the general safeguarding applies across the board. So that's just something to consider. This is guidance, and you need to refer to your own safeguarding policies and those that you work with, and the various stakeholders within that, to make sure that whatever you're doing fits in line with the broader safeguarding. So that's the general scope. And within that is, as I say, kind of thinking about how live video fits within wider safeguarding. There's the DfE guidance around use of technology in schools, which I'm sure everybody's familiar with and will obviously be supported through schools. So it's ensuring, it's just considering, is the system that you're running, does it meet those requirements? Does it help schools to meet those requirements? A key part of the requirements is also, whilst we want to protect and ensure that there's appropriate filtering, also need to make sure that it doesn't get in the way of effective learning and opportunities for young people. So it's always a matter of striking that balance and understanding where compromises are being made, but understanding the risks and making informed choices around that. That's appropriate for all of the stakeholders involved. So that's something is just to consider around how does, when introducing live video into the school environment or other environments, how can you communicate it so that you are clear that it's supporting the statutory requirements around safeguarding, and so that you understand that, and that will help with adoption for the programme as well. So hopefully if you can kind of clearly demonstrate how it's linking, that should be helpful from there. Training is a key part of that, and so making sure that all of the staff involved have relevant and suitable training, etc., around child protection, but online safety, and that's updated regularly, and that's something we'll revisit around as well, about staff and responsibilities. I think one of the interesting things around live video, and I've been thinking about this, aside from the sort of the main safeguarding approaches, is the potential knock-on effect of introducing live video to potentially younger children who this may be the first experience of using live video, or that you're introducing a technology which has some potential risks if used in a more informal setting. So young people using live video to communicate with strangers at home, for example. And whilst in this context you can have lots of safeguarding processes and reporting structures, etc., in place, it's an opportunity to consider this kind of activity and to place it in a wider safeguarding e-safety kind of context for the young people. So are they aware of the differences between this kind of interaction and just using live video with people that they are in a less formal, that they don't know online? And are they relating that to the e-safety information which they've heard in schools? And it's also an opportunity to think of a way to reinforce the general safeguarding online safety kind of instructions that young people get. They're often quite happy to kind of recite e-safety messages, but maybe don't consider them in a sort of more lived experience. So I think there's a real opportunity when delivering live video to consider how you can reinforce, support and remind children, young people about the general ways to stay safe and resilient, how to report, how to recover online, good practice on there, and to help link it to other aspects. So I think it's a quite powerful opportunity for the work that you're doing as well. So just in the guide, how I've structured it is to, because it can be quite a dense read to just go through lots of complex points, is to have a piece of text where we talk about those in more detail, but then at the end of each section is just to raise some points to consider, which are mostly just questions for you to consider. Hopefully this makes the guide slightly more useful in the day-to-day aspect as well, so you can just quickly refer to it and just ask yourself, your team, or those that you're working with some of these questions. And you may not be able to say yes to all the questions, but understanding what does that mean for you, and that you've made an informed choice. It's not that one way is better than the other necessarily, but that you understand the impact of making that choice. So these are some points just looking back at the wider safeguarding context. Does it help schools to meet their statutory requirements? How will the live video be included in general staff training? Who's responsible for training and updated? How will that be shared with people? So how will you keep people informed about changes that happen? How will your own staff, but also the staff that you're working with in other settings? And then thinking about where this sits in a broader, young people's broader understanding of online opportunities, risks, and resilience. So how does this fit within, and how can it reinforce other learning around e-safety and good practice online? That then links, so we talked about training, which links obviously into staff responsibilities and skills. I mean, it goes without saying that staff should be appropriately trained, but both in the technical and safeguarding issues, but also not just on live video, but again, the wider safeguarding aspects of being online. And something around, I think I mentioned it in the previous slide, around individual children's developmental ages. And so the UK Council for Internet Safety has a framework for learning in a connected world, which might be a useful reference around the kinds of abilities and understanding that young people have in general at different developmental stages and ages. And that's a useful reference to consider how live video might sit within their broader understanding. So ensuring that staff have an understanding of that, I think, will help live video to have more context. In a management sense, obviously ensuring that there's a clear designated responsibility for who's in charge of the platform, and that those staff receive additional training around the technology and managing users, around the data, about reporting procedures, and making sure that they have the suitable training, and again that's kept updated based on the different changes in technology and responding to use as well. So it's something to consider around the ongoing review. And then, again, this should fit into your broader staff development and training. The other part is about the actual equipment that's being used, if it's looking at school context. So are the teaching staff in the school who are maybe supporting the young person to access the laptop or the video that they're using, do they have the appropriate understanding about how to set up the equipment safely, to switch it on and switch it off safely, to sign in and out of things? Do they have the appropriate guidance? And again, how do you make sure that new staff have the appropriate skills and understanding from there as well? So that's just ensuring that all the different layers involved have the relevant training as you develop the program. So again, it's just some points to consider. One aspect within there is obviously a systems administrator who may be the admin for the video learning platform. They will have potentially quite a lot of access and ability to set up the system. So what's the oversight for them? How is that reviewed? And what training? And are there additional security measures in place to ensure that their access is secure, and that there's some review of what they're able to do and who's doing it as well. Similarly, just things like technical issues. So whilst this isn't specifically about the hardware, but if the hardware might lead to safeguarding concerns, it's making sure that you've got appropriate tracking if cameras are broken or various different things. How does that link in, and is that being tracked appropriately? I'll continue on as we go. I think just let me know if there's any particular issues that come up, but just 1 second. The next area is considering around live video platforms and choosing, and there's just a huge range and an ever-evolving range of different platforms and systems that you can use, and as technology evolves, it's going to accelerate even more. So rather than trying to look at individual platforms or recommend different services, which I don't think would be appropriate, I've just tried to draw out some of the key aspects that might be points to really consider when looking at this. So first is free versus paid. I've not seen a free version of a system. It's okay for testing and maybe doing a very limited pilot to understand the technology and for training. But I think paid for services generally offer the kinds of features which you probably need for appropriate safeguarding, mainly user management and ensuring privacy around connections and things like that. So it's not to say that you can't use free, but it's definitely worth considering what are the limitations for that, and how does that impact on safeguarding. And a key part of that is often the user management, and that to me is one of the key parts of ensuring the live video can be managed successfully, so that you can set up users, but you can set up, for example, when we set up the Zoom call today, being able to mute people or have a waiting room, being able to create URLs for people to access, being able to limit that, all of that kind of stuff. And that's often in part of a paid for service. So I think the user management is probably a key area when deciding which platform to consider. That might be affected if you need to integrate with existing platforms. So does it integrate with a single sign-on system within a local authority, etc. as well, but and also within your other systems that you use. So that, I think, is probably a focus when deciding on the relevant platform for yourselves, and there's that will lead to lots of other aspects of the safeguarding. Aside from the core parts of being able to deliver the live video, manage users, invite them in, there's some additional features often that are available, which may be very useful, but also may have a different kind of safeguarding consideration to them. So screen sharing or sharing of files, for example, that could be very useful in a learning context, but need to consider what is being shared, who decides what can be shared, and how is that moderated or managed. So is it possible just to share particular files from a designated area? Is it just the tutor who can share, or is the student able to share? How can you switch those factors on and off? Is there any record of when things have been shared? And just understanding the ability to switch those features on or off as needed as well. Similarly for chat and private messaging. Again, this may be useful as we're using it in this context for asking questions, etc., for large groups, but it can also be a back channel for different conversations. So making sure that that can be appropriately moderated, and is it actually necessary? So my personal take would be to not have private messaging and chat unless there's a consideration that it adds real value to the experience, and then if you are using it, it's to ensure that it has appropriate moderation, and maybe that's recording all of the chat messages, etc., ensuring that there's not just one-to-one private messaging, but you can have that there's always multiple people in that as well. Excuse me 1 second. Having said that, accessibility is something to consider, and obviously that's something which you need to consider in all of the work that you're doing, but maybe chat, having text input is beneficial for some learners and in some settings as well. So making sure that the system is usable by all users, and that you're not inadvertently creating the safeguarding risk by having some features like reporting or accessing the device that's less usable by people who need additional support. So that's just something to consider, and that will depend on the amount of work that you're doing with different users, but and there may be special consideration to make to that. Recording of video is obviously another very useful aspect of live video, and as part of the lessons. And for playing back and reflecting on learning, there is some practical considerations around recording. So are you able to store and record all of that without impinging on the experience? If you are storing all of the recordings, is it safe? Is it stored securely and carefully managed? And what's the retention policy? So if someone wants to remove their video, consent is obviously a key part of that as well. So it's making sure that both parents, teachers, carers, and the young person, children themselves understand that video is being recorded, what it will be used for, how it will be stored, and if they want it to be removed, what are their options and how do they go about that. Those are things to consider across any kind of collection of data in that way. And this is video is a form of data in this way. So considering how long you need to retain the videos, how do you dispose of it? If someone wants to have their video removed, are you able to find it and remove it easily and respond to that request? It's also worth considering, if you don't get consent, are people unable to take part in the learning, and are there alternative ways in which you can provide the learning opportunity without them having to consent to having video recorded from there? Just 1 second. So just some points to consider. If you're considering the free version, is it suitable for what you want to do? How are you going to set up and manage users is a really key concern, I think. Do children need to register and log in? So it's probably ideal if you can avoid capturing any personal data, if young people not required to set up their own accounts, use their passwords or create log in with email, etc. It's probably beneficial if you can just provide a one-time link that has that you can control access to, because that restricts maybe access of the platform outside of designated hours. So just having one-time links that people can use, like we do with a Zoom meeting, for example, where you also don't necessarily need to log in and use and submit any personal information. That means then you don't have to look after that data. You're not responsible for securing that, but also it's reinforcing maybe potentially good habits so that young people understand not to share some data as well. However, that needs to fit within your personal context and the learning thing. So maybe it's a single sign-on for a school, and maybe it's integrated into the devices already. So there's always exceptions on that. Where there's additional features to consider, how they're used, why they're needed, and are they appropriately managed? And particularly for recording, have you got the appropriate consent? And is that, can you manage requests to remove the data? And can you still provide a learning opportunity if consent isn't given for recording? A lot of these then lead into the actual aspects of delivering a live video lesson. So supervision is something which you'll be very familiar with already, but it's worth considering how that applies to live video. And is everybody aware of the agreement around supervision, and is that maintained in the live video lesson as well? So just reminding people about how the session will be supervised, who will be responsible, and what people's options are if they feel that it's not being supervised in the way that was agreed initially. So that then links into reporting, and how does that link into a wider reporting structure within the school or the learning environment that you're working with. Again, consent, making sure that that's in place, and that not just parental consent and teacher consent, but the young people also understand that, and that they understand the supervision and how to report. Something which suggest in the guide is maybe just making sure that there's printed hard copies of saying this is how to report, not just relying on a one-time instruction at the beginning, but in each lesson also reinforcing that, so that it's the airplane safety briefing, I guess, is to make sure that people are constantly always reminded of their options, because it's easy to do it once at the beginning and then forget, and then actually it that's where things can maybe go wrong as you get more comfortable with the technology. At first, it's about using the technology and becoming familiar, but after a while, once you get used to technology, we need to remember about some of the process issues as well, and keep reminding people about their options and their agency within that as well. With video, something just to consider, and it may be an issue or not, but is what's in the background, and is there anything that's been inappropriately shared in the background? Is it suitable for the lesson? But also, are there other people that may be in the background, and particularly if you're recording, and is that an issue? Joining and ending a session, I think, is a really key part. So you can have quite careful procedures and well-trained staff and a good understanding of the lesson itself, but where it may be at a weaker point is the initiating the call, initiating the live video lesson, and at the ending point. So who's logging on to the computer, who has access to it, who is responsible for ending the session appropriately, logging out of any systems, making sure that the device isn't available for others to misuse, that the video can't be used outside of sessions. And it needs to consider, is it appropriate to put that burden onto the young person, or is it better for an adult to oversee that? But then, are they appropriate, and do they have the training, and how do you manage that? So it gets a little bit messy at the beginning and the end. The actual lesson can be quite carefully considered, but it's worth remembering what happens before and what happens after, and how can you support that? Even if there's not a lot you can do about some of the aspects, understanding what those potential risks are, and then considering how you might mitigate it through training or follow-up or reminders, etc. Or if there's technical things, so you can auto log out and switch things off remotely, etc. So don't focus too much on the actual live video between the tutor and the child, but also what happens either side of it as well. And again, can you build that into a wider online safety awareness when you're delivering the lesson, and just reinforcing that this is a specific context of the use of live video, but not all uses of live video will be as well managed and supported as this. So yeah, I think again, where is it taking place? Is everybody aware of the reporting procedures? Does it make sense to everybody? And are you considering the full user journey when looking at live video? Because I think that's a really key part. Are you offering the right support at the right moments across the whole journey? And are your tutors aware of that whole journey as well, even if it's outside of their direct control? So I will pause there. Talking a little bit about home access, I think all of these things apply to home access. It gets more difficult. I think the environment and the supervision becomes more key within that even more. So understanding where the lesson is taking place, the scheduling of it, that it's agreed that it's not possible to initiate sessions outside of those agreed hours, that the parent carers or other adults in the home environment are fully aware and have opportunity to shape the supervision, but also understanding that not necessarily all of the parents will have the same safeguarding understanding as teaching and education staff, and that they bring their own potential safeguarding risks into that as well. So it's something just to consider as well. But how can you build on the potential positive aspects of parents to support young people in this, and not to consider their concerns around this? So how can you help them understand the creative opportunities and how this is beneficial? So a communication issue as well around home access, I think, is particular something to consider, and making sure that it's that staff can consider the setting and is it fully appropriate from there. And again, that beginning and opening, so who controls the device? Can sessions happen outside of an agreed, supervised, regulated encounter? That's probably the main challenge within home access, but I think there's more to explore, and I'd welcome other people's thoughts on that. So you probably heard enough from me. I've talked a lot and fast. If I we'll stop sharing and pass back to Emily to pick up any questions, and then we can open up the discussion. I hope that made sense. I couldn't actually see myself during that. I couldn't see anybody there. I was just talking to myself in the room, but I hope that all worked for everybody. Do let me know anything that was unclear, and really welcome any other input from there.
Thank you ever so much, Cliff. That was exceptionally thorough and a really useful overview of the issues and things that we all need to consider when developing these guidelines. So fantastic and fascinating. Just a few observations. I think it's really great to consider that this is an opportunity of building the digital resilience and knowledge of the young people and the teachers involved, which is really, it makes it a really exciting, as well as possibly at first a daunting thing to undertake, which is great. And I like that airline safety idea of just repeating those key messages and getting into the habit of repeating those key messages at the start of the lesson so that everybody understands it. I don't know if anybody has any questions yet. You can type them into the text box if you like, but we're also about to hand you all, we've talked a lot about sort of responsibilities here. We're going to hand you all some responsibilities. So in a moment, we are going to unmute you all and allow you to show your videos, and you will then be able to see one another, and hopefully that will then give you the impetus to jump in with a couple of questions. But once we unmute you all, if you could then immediately mute and switch off your videos and switch them on when you want to talk, that would be really useful. We will unmute you now. So would anyone like to... Hi. Julia, have you got a question? No. Would anyone like to jump in with a question, either on the video or in the chat box? Has anyone got anything that they would like clarifying or just discussing a bit further? I've got a new message down there. Can you see what that says, Grace?
On everybody.
Video.
Oh, bless you. Okay, Ruth. Have you got any questions, Ruth, that you'd like to put in the chat instead of on the video, as you can't use mic or video where you are? Yes, great. Fire away. While we're waiting for Ruth's question, I'll just add a privacy note about this. We will be sharing the slides and video and chat with you all afterwards. So obviously, if you don't want your video shown for privacy reasons, switch it off. Hi, Ralph. Have you got a question?
Can you hear me?
We can all hear you.
I just wanted to just check that the resource is in the Dropbox, the safeguarding file. I'm just looking for it now.
Okay, it's not in that shared Dropbox then. I think the old safeguarding guidelines are. These are ones that we are so Ralph's done Cliff's done the first draft of these guidance, and we're sharing them today, and then we'll be finalising them. I think, Ralph, you're in the Slack workspace as well, which some people in the Zoom meeting today are in, and you can access the guidelines in there.
How do I do that?
If you go on to, there's a Slack workspace which is online. I will resend you the invite after today. Everybody will have a copy of the safeguarding guidance as is sent out to them as well, along with the slides after this.
Okay, yeah, I've got it. Hang on. Oh, no. Forgive me, I'm not particularly savvy when it comes to technology.
Don't worry. But if you are able to get into that Slack workspace and have a look at, I'll tell you what I could do, Ralph. Are you wanting to have a look at them now, just to sort of go through any questions?
No, I just wanted to be able to download them so I can share them with Nick at Action Track.
Yep, you definitely will be able to do that. So after we log off, I will send you them and make sure that you and Nick have both got them so that you can fire any questions back. We've got a question from Ruth. I'm just trying to scroll up and see it. I can see half of it. Should a parent...
Should a child ever be left alone on a one-to-one online video lesson, or should it be stipulated that a parent or guardian should be present at all times?
Okay. Shall I hand over to you, Cliff, or would you like me to start with that one?
I don't know if you've got a view on how the lessons are done. I mean, how are face-to-face lessons done currently, I suppose, would be the first starting point.
Yeah.
And from your experience, how does that work across different settings?
Yeah, I think, I mean, one thing that came really clearly through your presentation, Cliff, is that every context is going to be different in terms of each hub or music service or music teacher is going to have different existing safeguarding protocols in place. And we're also going to be teaching children and young people who have a lot of different sort of needs and requirements and are a lot of different ages and stages in their lives. And I guess the answer to that is going to be moderated in response to all of those things. I think a sort of useful rule of thumb is that in a lot of face-to-face lessons, there's often a general stipulation that there is that lessons take place within the eye line and earshot of other people, whether that be a parent if it's a home lesson, or a teacher or member of school staff if it's doors aren't closed. That there's sort of the ability to see and hear what's going on. So I know with older children, or in some sort of particular circumstances, then supervision isn't something that would usually happen. There wouldn't usually be a teaching assistant or a parent in the room. With younger children and in other circumstances, there definitely would be. And I guess, yes, it's about sort of applying and moderating those for an online lesson as well.
Yeah, I think from a specifically digital content, I think all of that applies exactly to digital. From a specifically digital functionality point of view, that's where I was raising the point around chat and screen sharing or file sharing, because those are silent activities, if you like, which are more difficult even if there is someone within earshot or eye line to manage. So something to that's where managing things like comments, chats that might go under the radar as a kind of what we'd call a back channel in social media context. Yeah. Limiting those, and so you've got the video reflects traditional face-to-face as much as possible, means you can use your existing safeguarding approaches as much as possible within that. If you are using file sharing, screen sharing, etc., then that's maybe where you may need to consider that people are aware that that may be happening and what are the opportunities. So you can record chats, for example, and make sure that you've got a log for those, but also making sure that the person running the session can't delete those logs, so that even if they, or that the child can't delete them, so that if they're deleted, the system administrator can still recover those if you need to review a conversation that maybe took place, because maybe it's just inadvertence that things get misunderstood. So it's protection for both parties on that. And similarly for sharing, do you limit what can be shared? Is it in one direction, so the child can't share a file back, for example? Can you limit that you can't share links, etc.? Those kinds of things. Sharing the screen may be useful from a learning context, but can you limit, are there any ways to control that the staff understand, or that they don't have access to be able to share other images which they've loaded onto that computer, or to share, say, a web page that they've got loaded up in their browser. So that's where I think there's additional consideration, that where supervision is more of a concern, is where you use those silent aspects of digital.
Yeah, and so it's making sure that the electronic supervision is built in to the system then.
Yeah, and that you're just aware that there is the potential risk. It's not that you don't use them, but that's understood, and that both parties know how to report if they feel that it's being used in an inappropriate way.
That's really useful. Thank you, Cliff. I know Julia's keen to come in with some thoughts. Julia from Cambridgeshire Music Hub. Hi, Julia.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Brilliant, yeah.
Smashing. Well, I first want to say thank you to Cliff, Try again. Thank you, Cliff. There's so much to think about there. Really appreciate your expertise and the thoroughness that you've taken us through today. And I certainly need to go away and have a think about a lot of that stuff. But I just thought it might be helpful to let everybody know our focus. So thank you for touching on home tuition. In Cambridgeshire, that's actually going to be the focus of our blended learning work. And we will be broadcasting performances into schools, but not doing the online teaching in school settings. I think that our way forward with this, we already do home visits, and we have a home tuition policy, which is on our website if anybody wants to see it in the About Us section.
Thank you. And
I can see us actually building in the online version into our home tuition policy, because we are, as we will be mixing in, how would you describe it? It's the blended learning model, is to mix in live video with one-to-one interaction in real life, in person as well. So I think it'll be really helpful for us to see what our policy currently covers and what extra things we need to think about that you've taken us through. And just something that's really struck me today is that I hadn't thought at all about the different cognitive levels of children at different ages, and that how actually we need to think about what's our age threshold for this, and do we need one? And as you say, what are we introducing children to in that wider context? So thank you for that.
Well, that's a really good point about the sort of blended thing. I think one thing to take, I always consider around digital, is it's not separate. It's to be woven into what you already do, into the practice that you do, but to consider where it may impact on what you do in slightly new ways. So not to have a separate digital, but to blend that with your overall safeguarding or your engagement or pedagogy. In that way, so I think what you're talking about makes perfect sense and is a good approach. Wherever you can achieve that. I think, thanks for the feedback on the considering about the developmental age. And the one thing I mentioned was the UK Council for Internet Safety Learning in the Connected World, which is available online. We can send the links in the guide and we can send that around. That's helpful that was developed by the UK Council for Internet Safety Working Group on Education. So it's had quite a lot of input from a number of different stakeholders around the kinds of things that young people should be able to do at different ages. Obviously, it's quite general, but it gives you a feel for where different skill levels for being able to use devices, use browsers, that kind of stuff, but also their understanding. Just something which is coming out in the new year to complement that is there's another working group from the UK Council which is on digital resilience. And so at Parent Zone, we co-chair the digital resilience working group. And so resilience is different from skills in that it's a more dynamic capability. So it's about, you can be resilient in one context and not resilient in another context. Your resilience can go up and down depending on your experience. And a key part of resilience is recovery and being able to get back in to achieve stuff and thrive. And how you apply that into a digital context is something to consider. So overprotecting someone and not giving them the opportunities actually weakens their resilience for when they may encounter stuff in other contexts. So we're developing a digital resilience framework, which will be a series of a toolkit, questions, considerations for people who are providing internet for all users, but particularly useful for young people. So whether it's a physical setting, library or school, or a home, so have you got filters, are those suitable? Whether it's content, so maybe music lessons, or whether it's a platform, so if you're Facebook, etc., or if you're a policy person and you're deciding on the policy, so whether it's for setting Wi-Fi access for looked after children, residential homes. And these will just be a series of a way to consider your activity, content, resources, approach in the context of digital resilience. And so to sit alongside the educational skills framework is also considered resilience. So that will be something which comes out in the new year, which may be useful to weave into the work that you're doing. And again, a practical tool just to reflect on what you're doing and make sure that it's helping young people in the most positive and creative ways, I think.
That sounds hugely useful, Cliff. And I think sort of knowing more about how we can, as a sector, keep updated on these issues and developments is something really useful that's come out of this discussion. And obviously, as you said, we'll be sharing links with some of these sort of key sources of advice about sort of digital tech and education and resilience. I think a really important thing that comes through with that resilience point is it gives us the ability to be stronger advocates for sort of including online technology as part of that wider young person's education. And I know that a lot of people sort of embarking on the online music education have sort of had to have quite a lot of conversations with a lot of different stakeholders to sort of say this is a good idea and it's a good idea to do it now, and obviously come up against those sort of hesitancies and very valid concerns sometimes. So it's really useful to sort of couch it in that wider context of actually young people are going to encounter all of this technology as they grow up, and it's really useful for us to give them the skills they need to do it. So that's
I think this is something, there's a huge opportunity for the arts and cultural sector as well to contribute to this. So I think, I'm always trying to wave the arts and culture kind of flag in different areas. And I think this is an opportunity to say not only can music lessons be informed by digital policy and technology, but can actually help deliver on those things. So this having a positive experience of live video and seeing what a well-structured live video can do and things to consider, and that the young person feels empowered to report, knows how to report when things are not appropriate, that can bolster them in their wider life. As live video becomes more mainstream and it's something which they'll use all the time, there's an opportunity for arts organisations, music lessons to role model some of that best practice so that young people have a higher expectation of the services and the encounters that they have. And what better way than through a creative experience? We know that young people can parrot fashion safeguarding safety messages, the e-safety things that they learn in primary school, but it doesn't sink in. If they're learning through an experience that is more linked to their personal passions or creativity, then I think those messages will resonate more strongly with them. So I think is to consider the live music lessons and all kinds of creative activity using digital as a huge opportunity for the arts sector to kind of, and to position it as this is a way to reinforce good digital citizenship for young people. So not just feel done to, but actually the arts sector can take a lead on some of this.
No, that's really, really useful points there. Thank you. And I think that will be really useful in enthusing and energising, hopefully all of us who are in the room and developing these approaches. Does anybody else have any questions or observations about this session? I'll just give you a couple of seconds to jump in on chat or on video. Okay. Right, well, I'll talk. Feel free to jump in if a question does arise. Well, first of all, once again, thank you so much, Cliff, because that has just been absolutely fascinating and hugely helpful. And we will, Cliff and I will work on finalising the digital safeguarding guidance that Cliff's done so much hard work on. And we will sort of be publishing that at the beginning of next year. So there is a chance after this session for those of you who need a bit more time to sort of cogitate and come up with any questions or reflections you'd like us to consider, or for those of you who are joining the session after the live event. Hello everybody who's watching on catch up. So please do sort of drop me a line with any further thoughts on the guidance, if there's things that you think we need to include in that. So it's emily.penn@nimas.org.uk. Just so, yeah, we'll be updating the guidance and publishing it in the early part of 2019, in January, in fact. So everybody who is subscribed to the NIMAS Remote Music Learning Network will automatically get an update of that guidance. So if you've not joined yet, have a look on nimas.org.uk, and you can sign up for that free network, which just enables us to keep you informed of developments that we hope will help you in developing your approaches to online music education. I think many of you are already in that network, but just for anyone who's hopped on from somewhere else. I think that's about all from me. Cliff, it's been really, really useful and fascinating, and I think has sparked lots of ideas, as Trivia and Ruth have said. We've got another question from Andrew. Do you think there would be any additional safeguarding considerations for linking wicket sessions? So that's teaching to a large group of children in one room in a massed performance. So I guess what Andrew's talking about there is having different sort of whole class tuition all performing at once. I think.
Hi, Emily. Can you hear me, Emily?
Yeah. Hi, Andrew. Yeah. Sorry.
We're just thinking about new ways of using the Connect Resound technology, and one of those might be different areas of the county to bring together a master performance. And I know that's different to individual tuition, although the hope is that actually some of our individual tuition will grow from this master event. So I just, everything that Cliff said made perfect sense. I can't think of anything extra that we need to think about in terms of linking several schools together. But that's the hope that we might be able to do that around like Easter time.
Great. Oh, that's really exciting. I'll give you my answer first, and then I'll let Cliff give the expert answer. I guess the sort of specific things that I would say is, obviously you're going to need consent, the normal consent that schools would have around videos, and making sure that the pupils and the teachers knew where that video was going to be shown. So some of our live broadcast performances are publicly available through our website, for example. Others are just available to members of the Remote NIMAS Music Education Network, so it's a more limited sort of educational audience, or you might even limit it further and have something that's totally password protected and only available to people who have that link, or only on a sort of one-time access basis. So it probably depends on the sort of breadth of the audience you want to reach and the consent that already exists for video sharing and that you want to keep for video sharing. And I suppose the other thing is about enabling access. So are there ways, if one person in one or two of the groups aren't able to be on that video, are there still ways in which they can be included? And you know, there's often a variety of different ways you can do that, with camera angles or blurring or those sorts of things. I'll hand over to Cliff for the definitive answer.
Thank you.
I think Emily, the expert there, I think that covered everything I was going to say. It's obviously probably slightly less safeguarding concerns if it's one-to-many and a broadcast mode rather than one-to-one. I was just thinking about the inclusion aspect. So if you can't be, can young people still take part? I think YouTube stuff was being able to blur faces on YouTube is something. So if you've got a video, and it's just something to consider if you want to publicly push out videos and there's some young people, it raises some questions about, you know, then people look like, you know, you're blurring out faces, which is not the nicest way to deal with things, but it's a potentially handy tool if that's a concern as well. If you've got a video of a large group who are performing and there's individuals within that aren't, you don't have consent for or shouldn't have been included for whatever reason, but at the time it was difficult to take them out, you can do face blurring on YouTube. It's something to investigate as well.
Yeah, thank you.
So yeah, that would be, but I think Emily answered all the questions.
Thank you very much.
Good, but yeah, that's really useful to know. I guess, yeah, as you say, Cliff, prevention's better than cure. So if you can do something clever with camera angles in a way that doesn't necessarily signal to any of the young people involved that that's what's happening, that's probably the best approach.
Yeah, and just as technology is evolving, the new kind of, you know, interactive avatar kind of things that you can get on iPhones and Snapchat filters and things like that. So if you're working with a group that's particularly where consent or publicly been identified is an issue, then you can get quite creative with that. So you can still use video, but applying a series of filters or using, you know, like cartoons that respond to the voice and the actions that the young people are doing, so that they don't feel excluded in quite the same way as not having to take part at all. So it may be worth investigating some of this new technology as a way to build on that as well. So,
wow, I can feel a whole new series of webinars coming on around how we incorporate virtual reality with online tuition, which is something that came up in the last webinar as well. So I think we're always learning and developing, aren't we? Hi, Julia, have you got another question? You've just popped up.
Ralph Lister has a question.
Ralph, great. Hi, Ralph.
Hi. So what happens if we're doing one-to-ones with a student who's not at school using an iPad or phone?
Great question.
Yeah, so I suppose it's who's managing that device, and what's the potential risk of initiating contact outside of the lesson as well. So it's a difficult one. So is it their own device? Is it a device that's been provided by the school or the care service or different settings? If they've got that, if it's for example, like a Zoom type link, if it's a one-time link, then maybe you're not collecting so much information. You don't know what device people are on. You know, you can be on a phone, etc. So it's maybe not too much of an issue. But again, it's about understanding if it's an owned device by a school or whatever, then there's maybe additional safeguarding that you can do as a managed device. So are there settings that can be set within that to restrict access to various different content and sites, etc. But if not, maybe, you know, so the one-time links type approach is maybe one way to do that. So it's not tied to a particular device or a logging in any way. And then normal safeguarding things, not sharing personal contact information, would still apply in terms of if you say you don't need the phone number, for example, or there's no exchanging of emails, etc. from those. I think the wider safeguarding stuff applies as well. So helping the young person to understand how they're using that device in a safe way. So their encounter with music tuition live video might be a positive experience, but just to remind them again that live video on that device might not always be in the same way, and so things for them to consider. So I think it's this opening. Live video opens a door to a new technology and a new way of interacting with people, which is really creative and positive, but we need to help young people maybe understand the potential risks and how they can manage that from there. So I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, but that's one thought on it anyway.
Well, just in terms of working in, if you like, new contexts. So we might be working in predominantly with 16 pluses who are NEETs. So it could be young people who are at home, or it could be it could be in a variety of settings where they're not supervised. And so it's a different set of considerations to going into a school. So the idea of using, and I'm not good on technology, so the idea of using something where there's a one-time link sounds like a good steer to me. But obviously, the probability is they'll be using their own device.
Yeah, there's not necessarily an issue with them using their own device, because that opens up lots of opportunities to connect with young people in ways in which maybe been locked out of opportunities before. So, but it does raise other issues around if you're sharing. So those things like being able to share stuff, being able to share content, what information is being shared between the student and the tutor, considering if it's a mobile device, what is in the background, considering the setting, and being able to draw a line on that. So can the tutor refuse to deliver a lesson if the environment is not suitable? And so having a lot of prep and understanding about what are the rules of engagement, if you like, I suppose, is the key part within that.
Sure, that's
not
really useful.
The device, but and particularly working with those young people, that would be a key part of the work as a whole. So again, it's not necessarily that digital is separate from the work. It's about what's the expected behaviours, what's the expected, and it's a contract between the young person and the tutor as well. Emily, I think.
I was just going to no, that's exactly what I was going to sort of jump in and say. It's about that ground rule setting, isn't it, in conjunction with the young person, and just having those discussions about, okay, so where is the useful room for these lessons to take place? There should be an expectation that the pupil and the teacher are both sort of, they're wearing the sort of appropriate clothes that they would for a public sort of meeting, and that if that's not the case, then they know the lesson. Those sorts of things, just sort of setting those ground rules initially in the way that you would for the rest of the interaction with the young person, and adding the sort of extra digital things in there would be a great way of setting that up.
Yeah, I mean, we're just, because this is a not typical setting, we might be working with 20-year-olds.
Yeah.
Who have anxiety issues.
Yeah.
Who have a history of mental illness. So
there's still vulnerability there, but it's a
adult rather than safeguarding children. So
there's still the same things apply about appropriate setting and behaviours, and actually having some structure around that may be beneficial as well. So understanding, knowing what the process is, how things are set up, how to report stuff that's part of helping people with anxiety sometimes as well.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Ralph. That was a really useful question.
Just one other thought around if working with young people in more challenging circumstances and they're using their own devices, if it's video, consideration should be given to how they're going to connect. So do they have where they're getting the Wi-Fi connection? Is it a suitable environment? Is it public Wi-Fi, like McDonald's type Wi-Fi? Is that suitable for what they're if they're using credit, is that actually, do they have credit? How's that going to impact on the rest of their use for the devices as well? So it's a tricky area because, do you get into providing credit, etc., or Wi-Fi? So it's something to consider, is the actual connectivity and accessibility.
Thank you.
That's a really useful point. Sorry, Ralph.
No, it's good. Thank you.
We'll maybe add a note with at least those questions in there, Cliff, to the guidance, because that's a really useful point that we sort of hadn't considered with the rest of the settings we were looking at. So thanks for that.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, I don't think we've got any more questions yet on the chat. So I'm guessing there's no more burning questions. Okay, in which case, I think it's almost time to sign off. So again, just to let you know, we will share a copy of this video, a copy of the slides, the guidance as is so far for you all to feedback on, and a form for you to feedback on the usefulness of this webinar after we sign off. Thank you all so much for participating and contributing to this webinar. It's really useful to have a range of expertise and useful questions from lots of different angles. So thanks ever so much for that, and for coming along today. And thanks awfully, Cliff, for such a really thorough walkthrough of all of the issues, and you really have helped us all to think and to structure our thinking around this, which is just so helpful, because as I think you've shown us through the slides, it's a vast area, and I think having some guidance to sort of to take it as a step-by-step process is really invaluable. So thank you all very much. Again, if you can let us know when you feedback, sort of feedback on the webinar, feedback on any sort of questions about today's topic, but also any ideas that might be useful for future webinars, that would be really helpful. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ralph.
Thank you. Yeah, cheers. Bye.